Joining me now is CNN national security commentator and former Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers. Congressman, thanks so much for being here. How should the U.S. respond to this increased aggression by the Russians in Syria?
You know, the first thing that's going to have to happen is we have a strategy on ISIS. When the United States comes out and says your strategy is flawed, we really know what the Russians are trying to do. They're trying to push out the secure zone and protect Assad's troops. Anybody that didn't believe that was going to happen when they started ramping it up hasn't been paying attention. So I think we have to take it in phases. One, you have to make sure that they understand that we're serious. If we, in fact, are serious about continuing our air campaign, then we need to ramp up what we're willing to do. Turning and flying away when they cross that 20-mile mark is not telling them, sending Russia the right message, candidly. So put together an ISIS campaign that is aggressive. We don't have one of those yet. And then circle back with Russia and say, listen, this is what we're doing in eastern Syria to combat ISIS, so that we can reset the table for negotiation. Right now, everything that you see, the missiles flying over Iran, Iraq to hit Syria from the Caspian Sea, to ramping up ground operations with Assad's forces, to the incursions into NATO, fellow NATO country Turkey, is all calculated by Vladimir Putin. We need to change that calculus or we're going to get ourselves in some trouble.
Assad has massacred, slaughtered tens of thousands of innocent Syrians. Is the end game here for Russian President Vladimir Putin really to have Assad safely ensconced in power?
The end game for Putin in Syria is to maintain influence there. And I have to say he's doing pretty well. So he needs to keep that warm water port in Tartus that was a Navy base that was established in the 70s. He needs to continue his arms sales both in Syria and Iran. And now he's done something pretty clever, Jake. He's coordinated Tehran, Damascus in Syria, and Baghdad in Iraq in an intelligence sharing operation. And many believe now there's even a possibility of Russian troops in South Iraq to deal with the Syrian issue, invited in by Baghdad. So that is in Putin's interest. That's what we need to understand. It's not really keeping Assad in power, it's keeping his influence alive, and that's exactly what he's doing. I think he would cut a deal to get Assad out if he felt that that served his long-term interests in the region.
Is there a scenario where you think the U.S. should possibly coordinate airstrikes and military operations with the Russians against ISIS?
I wouldn't do that anytime soon. What I would do, and I think the Secretary of Defense is correct, you need deconfliction. You don't want an accidental ramp up. You don't want two planes colliding. You don't want planes shooting at each other because there's some confusion over a target in eastern Syria. But beyond that, I wouldn't coordinate. I would show our strength by coming up again, by rallying our Arab League partners to start pushing a real campaign in eastern Syria against ISIS. If you don't, the Russians are going to continue to look at all of this as an opportunity to expand their operations there.
There's a debate right now about whether the United States should be imposing a no-fly zone over Syria or over parts of Syria. What are the pros and minuses with such a thing?
I think the pros are certainly pretty clear, that it would send a line of which Russia couldn't cross, number one, so that you could train so-called moderate rebels, if there are any left in eastern Syria, to actually get back into the fight. That would be a very helpful thing. So those moderate rebels are being targeted now by both Assad forces and with the support of Russia. That would be a positive. That would be a big positive. The negative is now you've got to convince Turkey to participate in that. That's, if you're going to have a no-fly zone, it really needs to be along that Turkish border. And are they willing to risk the notion that you may have to strike at a Russian aircraft that incurs into that no-fly zone? You know, they just signed a deal with Russia, about $1.5 billion for a nuclear reactor built in Turkey. They have energy concerns. A lot of energy is imported from Russia to Turkey. They'd have to make some really difficult decisions. That's the con of it, is trying to put that thing together. We do have to have a policy, though, and we should have it pretty soon.
Congressman Mike Rogers, always a pleasure. Thanks so much.